Okay, so there's a big download coming in, and I want to try to work my way through this to see if I can make some sense of it. And of course, my cat is coming and attacking my ass right at the moment. Okay, so the deal is that our inner child, which is that most precious, most golden and perfect, absolutely perfect part of us, the one that hasn't been tainted by the world yet, that has not and will not be. There is no yet, actually. They have not been tainted by the world. There's a lot of talk about the inner child, and there's some confusion. There was for a long time for me about the inner child. The inner child can be very damaged. The psyche, the inner child psyche of the human being, can be incredibly damaged. However, the inner child, that child magical, that spark of divine, that is absolutely fine. There's no such thing as a wounded inner child from that perspective. And so I want to separate that out in my mind right now so that I understand what I'm talking about. That child magical, that's what I'll call it, child magical within us, that little nugget of goodness and God-seedness in us, that is perfection. And when we are raised in any situation whatsoever on the planet right at the moment, and especially the harsher and harsher and harsher situations where we grew up learning about our lack of value, our lack of safety, our lack of ability to trust the adults around us, when we had to take care of ourselves as children and really didn't have any idea how to do that very well, but we were left to do it anyway. When we were left to figure out our emotions, when we were left to deal with emotions that we were told were wrong, that no, you don't see that, you don't feel that, you don't think that, don't cry, what are you mad at, or we're made fun of. We're given a lot of conflicting messages, and so we grow a very hard shell. The human psyche of that inner child is very wounded. It's extremely wounded and has to be dealt with very kindly and with very gentle hands and soft hands and guided very, very, very specifically. And so it is not at all that I want to put out there in my mind or in anyone else's that kernel of nugget goodness in us, that divine child magical thing, that somehow is always what's in charge. As a matter of fact, for most of it, it's not in charge at all. That's what we're trying to get to, is let her have the wheel, let her have the wheel, let him have the wheel, let that have the wheel. And that inner child, it's marrying up that inner child, the wounded psyche of us and that child programming and stuff, letting that trauma heal and integrate and meld with our child magical, our God seed, our goodness. That when we can do that, then we are showing up balanced in the world, and we can protect ourselves, because we already know that we know how to protect ourselves. As children, those of us that grew up in trauma of any kind or dysfunction of any kind, or on the planet on any level, because the whole planet's been codependent and dysfunctional for millennia, that if we're here and we had to kind of figure things out on our own, or we didn't understand how to feel safe, or we couldn't rely on the big people around us, or things didn't make sense, then we grow up feeling very protective of ourselves. And that's what the ego does. That's its greatest job, is to be the gatekeeper for the rest of what's behind it. It's a wonderful mask. It's a wonderful, I'll kick your ass. It's a wonderful, deterrent if we feel like we have to be out there on the offensive to protect ourselves, or we're just curled up in the defensive, doing what we can to hang on, whatever it is. However, the child magical is balanced, and when it's integrated, we don't feel like we're in a constant state of having to protect ourselves. We don't feel like we need to be on the offensive or be on the defensive, either one. That we understand my boundaries. Oh, okay, doop, doop, doop. I've got an alert going off, that says, oh, I need to, pay attention over here. And then we go and we deal with the problem. We don't run away. We don't go hide under our bed. We don't, take 3 pills that make us go to sleep for a week, stuff like that. We deal with things as they come up. However, very few people that I've ever met in my entire life really know how to do that well on every level across all domains. Some of us, we manage to squeak it out and leak it out in a couple of different places. However, to be fully integrated across all domains, that's why we're here doing the hero's journey and getting up day after day after day. Sometimes not getting up, as quickly as before. However, we're learning, right? So the deal is, though, that as the ego is developing, the protective part of us, that is the protector, that's the gatekeeper, those protectors that They are the indicator. Our protective measures are the indicator of how well our inner child is in terms of integrating with the child magical. We can take a look at the psyche of a person and see what their defense mechanisms are, what their ego defenses are, what they do in a crisis, what they do when they're frightened, what they do when they're mad, what they do when they feel challenged, what they do when their mask is ripped off, or when they think it might be, or when they're caught being vulnerable in some way that they don't appreciate. We can see the level of damage to that child psyche, that inner child, the wounded inner child. We can see that based on the amount of protection that is given from that protector source. And I'm going to call it the protector because the ego will identify itself in people's minds as acting a certain way, of being egoical or egoic. I'm making words up. Being egoic. However, the protector doesn't necessarily always come out in an egoic fashion. Sometimes the protector can just look like, I'm sliding away and I'm going to be gone and, out of the picture for the next however long until I feel like it's safe to come crawling out again. So sometimes people use the word ego, and it is all rooted in the same fundamental idea, but for purposes of me just trying to wrap this stuff out of my head and make sense of it, I'm going to call that the protector. So if we have a protector that is not really doing things in a healthy way, that means we have an unhealthy inner child somewhere. We have wounded parts still. We have fractals, we have fragments, we have something. Whatever people call it really doesn't matter. We have some part of us that still believes that it's not safe on some level. Otherwise, our protector selves would not come out in gang force, wouldn't come out one by one, wouldn't come out 100 by one, it wouldn't matter. They wouldn't have to come out as an over-the-top response or reaction, either to retreat or to go balls deep into, shutting somebody down. When we have those over-responses, they're overreactions, over-responses of some kind, that is an indication of our inner child and how wounded it feels, how threatened it feels, and it will be commiserate with the amount of overprotection that protector gives or takes or assumes is theirs to take, because they're worried about protecting the inner child. So the deeper we are into our understanding of that integration of the wounded parts of us with the child magical, which is not wounded, the more we can integrate those parts, the more that across a baseline, the day-to-day operations would become more in line with that child magical, that I've got this, I'm the protector, the child magical and the protector are one and the same, because that child magical, just because I'm calling it child magical doesn't mean that it's a child that has no capability. When we come from that background, we can get stuck in words sometimes, believing that child magical can't do stuff because it's not grown up. Oh no, I didn't say that, and I don't mean to say that at all. I mean that part of us, when it's fully integrated, it can be a completely beautiful protector that doesn't have to go on the offensive necessarily, and nor does it have to be in the defensive necessarily. It's balanced no matter what it is. So it doesn't matter. It will not naturally fall in one extreme or the other. It will naturally fall in its balanced place of, I've got nothing I'm worrying about. I've got nothing to be concerned about. There's nothing that I need to be walking around, looking for the offending party, somebody to jump out from behind a bush and go booga, booga, booga. There is nothing here until there's something here. And then when we're more integrated in that space, then we can see where we are. We can get an idea of how our child magical is handling things. How is that protector doing? Is that protector proactively looking for a way to cut this off and protect? Because protectors, whether they're healthy or not, is irrelevant. The protector ultimately of the human being, the human soul, the human psyche, and the human being body, the protectors of those in the youngest states or the most vulnerable states are those who set boundaries and enforce boundaries. And when we've come from places where people neither set boundaries appropriately or enforce them appropriately, or they put boundaries into our space, who taught us that we had no boundaries, we learned all kinds of convoluted things that we don't understand what a true protector is, which is why the psyche gets damaged in the first place, and the ego and the protectors, all those different parts stand up. They have no idea what they're doing. They just need to, it's like asking a 5-year-old to protect its collection of Legos. It's going to go into some childish looking stuff, and the older we get with it and the less we are really maturing through those painful experiences and growing and really, really growing into spiritual maturity and emotional maturity and emotional intelligence, we're going to have those juvenile reactions. However, they can look like they're quite grown up. They just look like financial ruin of someone else, or, doing something sneaky behind their back, or starting, a slander thing at the job, things like that, that they're still very juvenile in their intentions and in their consequence out here, because it's the same as a 5-year-old that's had his Lego collection heisted away by somebody else, and that's the most precious and dear thing to him. He's responding, he or she, they are responding in the way that they know how, and just because it looks grown up doesn't mean that that's anymore, an 80-year-old that responds in a juvenile way is still an emotionally immature person, no matter how old they are. So it really has nothing to do with chronological age. Very few of us are going to grow into our chronological age with emotional intelligence and maturity unless we're consciously, driving our car to do so. It doesn't just happen, by happenstance or surprise or by some magical process other than the child magical process, and that's a very intentionally driven and intentionally sought and intentionally walked process that we choose to do. So the idea, though, with the protector, if the protector is there to set boundaries, a healthy inner child, a healthy magical child that's integrated with our protector source, that inner child, that child magical, that divine place in us is going to be the integration of right brain, left brain, divine masculine, divine feminine, whatever you want to say, the polarities. It's going to be the integration of my heart and my head. I'm going to understand that the protector of me is going to respond and react appropriately, commiserate with what is happening to me and around me. Is this something that I need to get involved with? It's going to ask questions, lots of them. It's going to have an interview process, unless it knows right away that, oh, this is a dangerous thing and I need to cut this off right now, lickety split, I gotta go, which most of the time, honestly, and living in a combat zone, of course, or living in constant domestic violence or something along those lines. I'm not speaking about that. I'm speaking about just baseline, that most of us do not need to react or respond or go over the top the way that we have learned to do, because we feel like we've got no other place to go with ourselves. We often will be just, all over the place. However, when we look at things from a much more even keel and can say, am I being harmed in some way? Is someone physically attacking me? Are they after me? Are they just talking gossip and bullshit about me? Because if that's what it is, let's put that in the priority. We're going to prioritize and triage what is important to me. And when we are growing and knowing ourselves and really integrating that child magical with our human being self and working through the wounding of a literal child who had no idea how to triage that stuff, because they weren't supposed to know how to do that, and they learned on the fly and did not learn well, most of them. Most children aren't going to know how to deal with an emergency situation at 3, and they will deal with it accordingly like they're 3, and they'll continue doing it until they're 93 unless they learn a more mature way to handle things. When we can look at things and be able to triage them, to face them and say, oh, okay, that's not actually a direct threat to me. Somebody talking smack about me or somebody doing something, that's external to me. The only thing that I'm really going to ask that my protector inside of me, which is the integrated part, right? The most integrated part of the human me with my spiritual me, I want that one answering the call all the time, as much as possible. And when it doesn't, wow, that's mine to look at and say, oh, what happened? What part of me thought that there was something external out here that was bothering me? Let's have a conversation about that immediately. However, out here, whenever that protector, that child magical, is the one who's mature enough, emotionally invested and involved, and intellectually and spiritually evolved enough, as well as emotionally mature, to deal with it, I want that one answering the call of what's most important to me in this. Is it most important for me to just drop this and walk away? If it's important for me to get involved and stay, if I'm going to stay and play, I want to know why. Because, a load and go is what I'm interested in. In EMS, I used to be a paramedic, and in EMS, a load and go meant, we're in and we're out. We don't land long. We don't stay long. We got better business to do. We got to put this person, the priority is get this person in the rig and get on out of here. We don't have time to stick around. The one that's the stay and play is that, we have some time. We're going to put out our equipment. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. And emotionally, I look at my myself the same way, that if I'm going to load and go, it means there's something here that's a threat to me. I need bigger help right now than anything that's on the ground right here, and that I've got to get myself away and go talk to my 911 operator about where I get the next source of help, and please help me, and start talking to divinity about why it is that I feel that threatened, that I need to bug out and move on. And I answer that call very, very routinely answer that call. Otherwise, the human psyche understands that we're betraying ourselves, and it gets super mad and starts acting out, and we start acting very strange and don't know why. So if I stay in play, however, that means I'm in a controlled response. Most things are a stay in play, as in, I'm not going to let this ruin my day. I'm not running away. I'm not evacuating the building. I'm not leaving, dissociating. I'm not driving my car at 90 miles an hour. I don't feel terrified in leaving. I stay in play long enough to check up this process and say, what is this person saying? What are they doing? How am I feeling? What's the situation? And start asking those questions. And the minute that I can get the lay of the land and understand, then I can make my very, very, very chosen, very deliberately chosen response according to what's going on here. What's the protocol that I'm going to use? Which protocol do I need? The protocol of, oh, yeah, that's not my business. This is about you. And I'm going to go now. Thank you very much. Bye-bye. Thank you with you. And then the load and go, I would have already been gone because I needed to get away from there for my own emotional safety. But if I'm going to stay and play, doesn't mean I'm staying and playing long. Staying and playing doesn't mean it's an afternoon, play date that I'm there for the next 3 hours. It can be sometimes with people that, oh no, this conversation is short. We're doing a one and done. Or it could be a long-standing relationship where, we're just going to come to these triage moments. It's a matter of navigating life in a very EMS paramedic-y kind of way, where I'm just here to either stay and play or to load and go. Which one am I doing here? I'm navigating, MacGyvering, looking for how do I best regulate and modulate, myself as I move through this situation. What is it that's called for right here? The best that I can offer with that protector is that I'm going to leave that as my baseline, of course, is that I assume that I'm always protected, that I'm always taken care of, and that the universe has always got my back, and that everything is happening for good. However, I don't have to learn through pain and trauma necessarily. So if I pay attention and I understand that, okay, my protector is always on the lookout. However, occasionally, I might miss a cue, and even if I do, it's okay, because once I get someplace, it's on me again to rely on the protector in me to say, there's something here that I need to verbalize the boundary, understand the boundary, understand what the boundary is, mine and other people's, but I'm only here to enforce mine or to state mine. I'm not about, telling anybody else what their boundaries are. I'm only here to know what my boundaries are and to enforce them, to state them out loud if I need to, and to enforce them as assertively, aggressively, as kick-ass, whatever it is that is necessary. However, I'm going to do a whole lot to keep it back here in the diplomatic negotiations. I find that most people, it does not require having to go into it deep with people about, that's an ego thing within me. If my protector feels the need to absolutely jump out and bite people's neck on the regular, if I get into a shouting match with someone once a year, even that, it's been a long time since I had that kind of confrontation with someone, because usually it's not necessary. That's a matter of what in me is willing to do this, that would be willing to throw down with somebody. Why am I willing to do that? And other people may be more willing than me. A lot of people are. However, it doesn't matter as long as I'm not getting tapped into the ego and that protector stance of wanting to fight with someone, wanting to demand, well, my say in this is that blah, blah, blah. Who cares? That is ultimately, as sad as it sounds, to our ego, that's a point that if that was understood already, the boundary wouldn't have been crossed to begin with. So it's an exercise in futility, other than allowing the less evolved and immature parts of us to rant and rave and to feel like they have a sense of release of the frustration and the loss of control that they're experiencing, which is a very valid and real thing. However, to keep exchanging it out here, we never resolve it. So I would rather learn how to meet the need of that child. I'm going to need to go to my house and cuss you all the way out in my space, my house and my place, and not right here face to face, because I don't want to be doing more damage out here, nor do I want to be reinforcing that to the smallest part of me that wants to go, and really just get into it with somebody I can't allow that part of me to not understand that there's social order here and there's, karmic balancing, etc. There's just things that's not necessary. So I understand you're angry. I understand you're upset. I understand all of that. So let's go find a place where we can handle that, because me, as your protector of me, you're looking at her, Katie, that as me, that's protecting me, it's me that's going to be helping thee as well. It's not going to come from externally from anybody out here before it comes from me. Otherwise it doesn't stick. If it did, we'd be able to reach out here in all of these places where people are caring and kenning really badly and losing their minds and showing us their tail ends all the time. If that worked and we got some sort of something out here with all of that, and it was a reward that actually was beneficial, we wouldn't have the problem to begin with. However, it's not. So it's better, 2020, thank you. It's better for me to look inside me and say, okay, putting it out here externally, sometimes it feels kind of nice to be able to cuss somebody out and go, ha. However, I just don't like the way I feel when I'm done with that. So I really avoid that at all costs. Not that I don't put boundaries down or put my foot into it. I didn't say that. However, it's the way of saying it. That I take myself back into my own space and in my place and say, okay, let's lay it out here. What is going on here? What is the part of me that is so upset, that feels powerless, that feels so angry and so hurt and so angry, so mad and frustrated? What is that? Let's do that. And if I need to, scream into my pillow or kick the furniture, do what I need to do. Have a physical release for me personally is highly important. It's very important for me to do that. If it's important for me to dance or to scream, to do whatever it is that meets that child, the inner child of me. Sometimes it's to write, sometimes it's to do some photo editing. It depends on where I am, on the spectrum and where I am on the scale of, explosiveness. So finding out what that need is, though, is that protector, that child magical, that is the protector that has the most ability, the child magical and that protector, and that integration of those two sides and those two skills, the head, the heart, the divine masculine, divine feminine, heaven and earth, those polarities being brought together. That's the part that understands how to do us really well and can guide us through those activities, through those times where we can MacGyver our way through and understand, okay, I'm going to not cuss at you. I'm going to go home, and we learn discipline. We learn emotional maturity by crying when we're upset, by screaming when we're mad, in the appropriate place, in the appropriate way. We learn to container things until we go home or until we're in the most appropriate place to release that. And we're careful that we go back to those containers and actually release them, because otherwise that's just called stuffing it down. 2222. So there's all kinds of ways and techniques, and I found that many of the ones in psychology and therapy and etc. are really quite good. However, I've also found that just going into my own hood and saying, what is it that I need? What is that child magical in me asking me to do with that wounded inner child? What does that wounded inner me want that it's not getting, that it thinks that somebody out here has control of it, because they don't. I have the ability as a grown-ass woman to meet my own needs. I'm responsible for feeding myself, dressing myself, my hygiene, all of it, taking care of animals. I'm kind of responsible for my own thing here and doing pretty well. I don't need a handler or a caretaker or a helper monkey. I'm doing all right. So if that's the case, then I can absolutely also be responsible for taking care of you. Whatever part of me is all upset, tell me about it. What's going on with you? And it can sound a little strange to be in that kind of intimate exchange with ourselves. But I've found that is so very helpful. It's extremely helpful to just talk to myself. And, I find that I get answers. I find that sometimes I just want to, cry for a minute, or I just need to feel like somebody heard me. And every single part of me, I made a deal with myself years ago when I went through a major life change about 5 years ago. I made a deal with myself that every single part of me can be heard. You can all have a moment at the mic. However, you may not have it all at once. We can't do that because that's a melee that Kate can't understand all that. It sounds like schizophrenia in half a second and was absolutely driving me bonkers. It was truly, I was delusional sometimes trying to track all those conversations, and that was just a lot of wounded parts that all were screaming at the same time. And so the deal that I made in my own mind that I was given as the way to go forward for you, Kate, is to put some management here. How are you going to manage this crowd? Because there's a whole committee up here that's slamming, screaming, and carrying on. And if you want want to make it through and navigate this extremely complicated situation you're going through, it seems to me that you're going to need to find something else to do other than what you've been doing. So what you've been doing didn't work. It fell all the way apart. It's broken and burned down to the ground. So let's do something new. And so I started saying to those parts of me, hey, I'm willing to hear you. I love you. I absolutely adore you. However, I understand that you're all angry, you're all upset, you're all a bunch of different things, that everybody deserves a voice. Every single one of you that's part of me. If it isn't part of me, get out. You're not part of my inventory. We're not having that conversation with thee. However, every part of me, I want to hear that because I love you. I absolutely do. I love you, and I know that I need to hear every single one of you, but one at a time, please. And you may come to the mic at any point that you need to. However, please make sure that I understand what it is that you're after by being clear. Send an emissary if you need to. If there's a whole cluster of you, you can't all scream at one time. I just send one emissary to the mic, please, and let's talk about that. And it took time. You know, I'm not telling you there's ever going to be an easy way to get to where we can manage our own mind. We have to do it the way that we know how and the way that works for us to proceed forward. However, finding a system of some kind, that was just mine, was to be able to say, look, I need to find a way that I can hear every hurt, every pain, everything, go through all of the inventory, loosen up and, you know, dump out the stuff that wasn't me. That programming, that's not even mine. I don't care about that. I don't want to know about that. It's fine. But if it's my voice, I want to hear every single one of those because they're valid, they're important. They cannot be shut down, they can't be shoved down, and they can't be shut up, apparently, because it didn't work, and it wasn't, nothing else was working. So that's my system, is that it's gotten easier over time, that the voices, once that inside of me, that terror of I'm never going to be seen, I'm never going to be heard, I'm never going to be taken care of, I'm not, you know, the whole thing, each one of those little soul parts or little psyche parts or fragments, however you call that, whatever you call that, each one of those didn't understand that it was living in an existence with a whole body, that there's somebody in charge of this whole thing. Each one of those little parts of me didn't know that. Just like when I was a child, that I was 3, I didn't know that there's going to be a time when I was 50 something where I'd be able to get a handle on all of me. I had no idea. All I just knew is that, oh no, this chaos that's outside of me, nobody's in charge, nobody knows what they're doing. They're all nuts, and I'm on the chopping block every single day. I'm in danger. So each little part, when it splits out like that, it doesn't know. You know, a 5-year-old, an 8-year-old, a 16-year-old, that even still, there are parts of me that look back and go, oh my God, I had no idea that there was anybody. There was nobody in my world that made any sense to me in terms of who had decision-making power in my world. They weren't safe to me, and so I always felt like I was on my own and didn't really know what I was doing, and looked like I didn't know what I was doing quite a bit also. However, it left all those little fragmented parts, all those little split off parts to stand there and go, oh no, I'm in charge of a whole lot. And didn't realize that, oh, at 16 I know more than I used to, and I could easily take care of that 3-year-old better than the 3-year-old could take care of the 9-month-old, and the 56-year-old can take care of all of it. However, when we don't know that, and we're not bridging that communication somehow inside of us, then we can have all kinds of crazy conversations and all kinds of chatter, and the dialogue, the narrator, the committee, people call it all kinds of different things. We can have all kinds of anxiety conversations happening constantly, not to mention the overtone of all the programming from you should do this and all of that crap too turns into utter chaos. So my point isn't to tell you that I have the system that works for you. My point is simply to say that there is a system that works for you, and it's very heavily rooted in speaking to Child Magical. Get inside and ask the protector, the first protector that you find, the first person that you cuss out, the first thing you throw, the first thing you do that seems a little, I don't know about that. Ask it, hey, are you the protector? I'm going to think that you are. And then maybe have a conversation with that part and say, what is it about you and what you're going through? Tell me about that experience of why you feel so angry. Tell me about what you're doing here. Why do you feel the need to throw something? What is it that you're protecting? Who are you holding back any kind of danger from? Please please tell me about him, her, they. I want to know. I really want to help. And it might take a little bit, but if it works for you, believe me, it'll work for you. And if it doesn't, then I know that you can find something else that will. So anyway, I hope that this has been helpful for you in some way. I didn't know this was going to be a YouTube video, but here we are. It's going to. So take care of yourselves, enjoy your day, and get within your skin because you're divine. Oh my gosh, it's absolutely fine, and it's so powerful, so powerful. That child magical, again, child magical just to me represents the power of the universe in a very innocent and pure form. However, it doesn't mean it doesn't kick ass or say ass. So take care of yourselves and get there and get in your skin because divine, absolutely fine. Take care of yourselves, and I will see you again next time. Mwah. Bye, friends.